My name's Dave Bewley-Taylor. I'm Director of the Global Drug Policy Observatory at Swansea University. It's my pleasure today to be talking to Coletta Youngers. Coletta is Senior Fellow at the Washington Office on Latin America and Associate of the International Drug Policy Consortium. I'm going to be talking to Coletta today about the policy shifts within the United States, particularly with regard to regulated markets in Colorado State and Washington State, and the effect that these policy shifts may be having upon the policy debate within Latin America. So, Coletta, to start with, I wonder if you could tell us how, if at all, have events in Washington and Colorado affected the drug policy debate in Latin America, including within the OAS?
The votes in favor of legal regulated markets for cannabis in Washington and Colorado have sent a very strong message to the region that more flexible drug policies are possible. And I think even before those two votes, there was a lot of attention in Latin America to the fact that more and more states in the United States were either passing medical marijuana laws or decriminalizing use of marijuana, to the point where now more than half of those of our states have opted for one option or the other, and we now have two states that are creating legal regulated frameworks. Most likely in the 2016 elections, an estimated 4 more states will join those two. So what does that say to the region? It says to the region, we are expecting you to implement policies that are having a huge cost in terms of your own societies, while we let people smoke pot. That was picked up by President Santos when Proposition 19 was on the ballot in California, and that's when you first started hearing rumblings from Latin America that, well, maybe we should also be thinking about changing our drug policies and thinking about alternative policies. So I think this is one of the key factors driving the tendency in the region to look at drug policy alternatives. And it was also clearly very influential with regards to the OAS reports on drug policy that have just come out. At the Cartagena summit in April 2012, when the presidents met behind closed doors to talk about the drug issue, we are told that this is one of the issues that was under discussion, the tendency towards loosening marijuana laws. And if you look at the way in which the reports that were mandated by that meeting, that were undertaken by the OAS, have addressed the issue, there is both a reference to the need to consider regulated cannabis markets in the analytical report, and in the scenarios reports, or in the scenarios report, there is one entire scenario dedicated to a legal regulated framework starting with cannabis. The issue is clearly on the agenda, and it's not going away.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, more specifically, how do you think what's going on to the north is affecting debate within Uruguay?
Well, the Uruguayan government announced their initiative to create legal regulated cannabis markets in June of 2012. It was prior to the votes in Colorado and Washington. I think they were certainly influenced by developments within the United States regarding medical marijuana, decriminalizing marijuana, but I think the decision by the Uruguayan government was very much related to their own reality. Uruguay has had a growing problem with the consumption of Paco, which is a cocaine derivative that's extremely addictive, extremely dangerous, and in Uruguay the markets are very mixed. So there was a feeling that they need to separate out marijuana from this other market so that they can target their law enforcement efforts on Paco. In fact, I talked to one Uruguayan official who told me that he had a son addicted to Paco, and the way that happened was he went to purchase, and there wasn't any marijuana that day, and the dealer sold him Paco, and that was it. So, in short, their policy is very much driven by the local reality, but they are, of course, very attentive to what is happening now in Washington and Colorado.
And in that respect, to what extent, if at all, do you think the proponents of a policy shift in Uruguay are learning lessons from Washington State and Colorado, particularly in terms of messaging and working with public opinion?
The Uruguayan government is certainly following events in Washington and Colorado, but it's really Uruguayan civil society groups that have gotten involved in working with their colleagues and some officials in Washington and Colorado to learn from them in terms of what is the right messaging around this kind of reform initiative. In Uruguay, the proposal by the government has not had majority support. About 60% of the population is opposed to the idea. The Uruguayan government is moving forward because they think it's the right thing to do. And civil society organizations are working very hard to try and explain to people why this is a good idea. And one of the things they've found is that in Washington and Colorado, one of the more powerful messages was simply mothers talking about their children. I'm a mom myself. I don't want my kids smoking marijuana, but if they do, I certainly don't want them going to jail for it. Mm-hmm. So I think they've tried to take those messages that worked in Washington and Colorado and adapt them to the Uruguayan reality. And they've brought in some of the experts who worked on the communications campaigns in Washington and Colorado to help them. Now, if this initiative goes forward if this initiative goes forward in Uruguay, we're waiting for it to be voted on in the Congress. There will most likely be an exchange between Uruguayan officials and Washington and Colorado officials about their regulatory frameworks. Uruguay is in a very different situation because it's a federal government. There are much more limitations on Washington and Colorado as to what they can do because marijuana, of course, remains illegal by federal law. But there is a lot that can be learned comparing the different regulatory frameworks and issues like how do you put appropriate restrictions on advertising, that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Is that it?
That's it.
That was easy.